My fellow SADCers, the SADC summit has come and gone, and Zimbabwe is now the SADC chair for the second time in history. And as expected, the Zambian president, Hakainde Hichilema, didn't attend that summit for obvious reasons. The Zambia-Zimbabwe diplomatic rift remains unresolved. You see, the Zimbabwean government remains adamant that the US is militarizing Zambia in order to isolate Zimbabwe. Take a look at this recent tweet by the Zimbabwean ruling party, ZANU-PF. They said, President Hakainde Hichilema is a Western puppet who should stay very far away from the Zimbabwean parliament building. It gets worse. See, the Zimbabwean ICT minister Tatenda Mavetera allegedly tweeted that President Hakainde Hichilema is a security threat to Zimbabwe. Ladies and gentlemen, Zimbabwe has in the past had problems with countries like Botswana and indeed Zambia, but this is unprecedented. Zambia has so far, been soft as wool in its approach to this quagmire. President Hichilema has so far shown that he wants peace and not problems. Unless, of course, if this soft as woolness is an indication that President Hichilema is, scared. Scared of what, you might ask? Well, fellow SADCers, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasnamalites, varkudgarais, nevasnamarites. Welcome to the special report. Today, I'm going to show you why the current Zambian government can't win any diplomatic fight with Zimbabwe, which probably explains the soft stance so far taken by the Zambian government in dealing with the ZANU-PF insults. But first, let's take a look at what actually happened at the just-ended summit. 12 out of 16 SADC leaders attended the summit, and of the 4 who didn't, President Hakainde Hichilema is the one whose absence made headlines for obvious reasons. He was represented by his foreign minister, Mlambo Haimbe. So, Zimbabwe has taken over the chairship of SADC. President Emmerson Mnangagwa will be leading SADC for the next 12 months. And after those 12 months, he will still be involved in running the affairs of SADC for another 12 months as the outgoing chairperson. Remember that at the highest level, SADC is run by a group of 3. These 3 are officially called a troika because a troika is a trio. Keep in mind that SADC leaders meet twice a year. So that makes it impossible for them to collectively make decisions on a daily basis. Therefore, the people tasked with making high-priority decisions on a daily basis are the chairperson, the outgoing chairperson, and the incoming chairperson. Together, they make up what is called a troika. Before the just-ended summit, this troika was made up of Angola, Zimbabwe, and DRC, with Angola being the chair, Zimbabwe being the incoming chair, and DRC being the outgoing chair. So now, this is how the troika is looking like. Zimbabwe is now the chair, Angola is now the outgoing chair, and Madagascar is the incoming chair. Madagascar is the incoming chair because it was elected deputy chair at the just-ended summit. So, the way it works is that whoever is the deputy chair automatically becomes the incoming chair, which means the next chairperson. So, therefore, Madagascar will take over the chairship of SADC next year, and Zimbabwe will become the outgoing chair for 1 year. This summit also congratulated Zimbabwe and a few other SADC countries for holding peaceful elections in the past year. It's interesting that SADC doesn't say for holding free and fair elections. It simply says peaceful elections. Even the Zambian president, in his address to the SADC Security Council, also simply called them peaceful elections. No mention of free, fair, or credible. He also used the phrase work in progress. But the bottom line is that, as far as SADC is concerned, the issue of the Zimbabwean disputed election is water under the bridge. It's a closed chapter. Remember, this is the issue that ignited this diplomatic rift. I say ignited because, you see, the political firewood for this Zimbo-Zambi fire was already at the political fireplace way before the Zimbabwean election, which turned out to be the Sarajevo incident of this diplomatic rift. And this is because, ideologically, Mnangagwa and Hichilema are worlds apart. And what's even worse is the fact that when Hichilema won the Zambian elections in 2021, he invited opposition leaders within SADC, including Mnangagwa's biggest rival, Nelson Chamisa, to attend his inauguration. Hichilema's political party, the UPND, said that this gesture was meant to send a very strong message across the continent that we must do away with the politics of division, politics based on opposing views. For ZANU-PF, this was a red flag, a very big, bloody red flag. You see, before he came to power, President Hakainde Hichilema was part of an alliance of opposition parties in Southern Africa led by former DA leader Mmusi Maimane. The objective of this alliance is to transform politics in the region and fight autocrats. By autocrats, they simply mean most former liberation movements, chief amongst them ZANU-PF, and by extension, President Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. In contrast, ZANU-PF belongs to an alliance of former liberation movements which are in charge in 7 SADC countries, namely South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Namibia, Botswana, Tanzania, and of course, Zimbabwe. The ruling parties from these countries have strong ties dating back to the liberation struggle. All of them have never lost power in their respective countries since independence. In fact, this past March, these former liberation movements converged in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, to discuss issues affecting them, including fighting neo-colonialism and tackling what they call Western interference in their respective countries. So, do you now see the difference between Mnangagwa and Hichilema? President Hichilema comes from an alliance of opposition parties that is trying to dislodge what it calls autocrats, dictatorships. Interestingly, most of the opposition parties in this alliance are well disposed towards the Western countries that are viewed as enemies by a club of former liberation movements from which ZANU-PF belongs. This club of former liberation movements is fighting what it calls Western interference. So, therefore, any opposition party that is well disposed towards Western countries is branded a sellout of the revolution and deemed a security threat, especially in Zimbabwe. As far as ZANU-PF is concerned, Hakainde Hichilema was always deemed a security threat even before he came to power. The invitation of Nelson Chamisa to Hichilema's inauguration was a bitter pill to swallow for Mnangagwa. He is always preoccupied by the goal of blocking the wind of change and making sure that what happened in Zambia doesn't repeat itself in Zimbabwe. In fact, after attending Hichilema's inauguration, Mnangagwa went back to Zimbabwe and said that those who think that what happened in Zambia will happen in Zimbabwe should wake up and brew some beer to appease their ancestors, because surely their ancestors have deserted them. The Zambian president has been a marked man even before his rise to power. What's worse is that he is completely surrounded. Mnangagwa's political network in the region stretches across 6 countries. That is South Africa, Mozambique, Namibia, Angola, Tanzania, and Botswana. Well, of course, Zimbabwe and Botswana have had issues before when Ian Khama was still in charge, but that changed when Masisi took over. President Masisi has so far shown some inclination towards liberation politics. In fact, recently, he said that Botswana is demanding a rightful place at the table of African liberators. This was after Mnangagwa had invited him to contribute in the building of the multi-million-dollar Museum of African Liberation, housed at the Liberation City in Warren Park, Harare. So, that is why Zambia can't win a diplomatic fight with Zimbabwe, because countries that have a geopolitical influence in the region are led by former liberation movements that have historical ties with the Zimbabwean ruling party. Liberation movements that occasionally meet to strategize on power retention. Liberation movements that support and defend each other, even when one of them is offside. It's a club of brother leaders leading sister movements that are determined to be there for each other for the sole purpose of power retention at all costs, by any means necessary. This is why when Robert Mugabe was busy terrorizing opposition supporters after losing elections to Morgan Tsvangirai in 2008, you remember the June 2008 electoral violence? You remember the long sleeve, short sleeve, barbaric choppings that took place in ZANU-PF political bases, which I sometimes like to call the Zimbabwean version of Hitler's concentration camps? You remember that? Yeah. When all of that was happening, only two SADC leaders spoke out. These were Ian Khama of Botswana and Levi Mwanawasa of Zambia. May his soul rest in peace. These are the only two leaders that spoke out. The rest kept their mouths shut. They said nothing. They preferred quiet diplomacy over Zimbabwean lives. Many perished. Many were killed. Many are maimed even until this day. Yet, your SADC leaders kept their mouths shut. Why? They were protecting their own. Robert Mugabe. It's a club, you see. So, you can clearly see why SADC doesn't act on rogue states. It's not the SADC treaty or any of the SADC protocols that stops it from acting. It's the brotherhood of 7 liberation movements which run Angola, Tanzania, Namibia, Mozambique, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. Of course, the foreign policy of Botswana changes based on who is president, but by and large, they are the same people. It's a club. SADC has 16 countries, but from a geopolitical perspective, these 7 countries are the ones that run SADC de facto. Economically speaking, these 7 countries, run by former liberation movements, account for over 90% of the SADC GDP. They run SADC with a political iron fist. That's what makes Zambia's decision to ask the mediation of SADC tricky. Because these 7 countries run by former liberation movements have already resolved to fight the very thing that ZANU-PF has flagged on Zambia. That is Western interference. Even the big brother of SADC, South Africa, is a member of BRICS and has over the years been increasingly taking a hardline position against Western countries. So therefore, it can't be that hard for Mnangagwa to convince his club that Hichilema is a serious security threat. So that is why Hichilema's government doesn't stand a chance in any diplomatic fight with Mnangagwa's government. Mnangagwa is actually closer to the main opposition leader, former President Edgar Lungu, than he is to the current president, Hakainde Hichilema. In fact, Edgar Lungu was actually invited to attend Mnangagwa's inauguration last year in 2023. Hakainde Hichilema and his entire administration did not attend that inauguration. That makes the next Zambian election in 2026 very interesting indeed, because it's obvious who the Zimbabwean government will be supporting in that election. President Hakainde Hichilema is very lucky that by 2026, Zimbabwe will no longer be in the leadership of SADC at the highest level. But whatever happens, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.